Good evening and welcome back at it here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, episode 31 already. 31 episodes.
Wow.
This being the 31st, so I guess 30 episodes. Today is 31. With us as always from the NFL Network and NFL.com, Jeff Chadiha, and back, I believe, although it looks like maybe some painting went on there in the Eager household. Are you in Cincinnati? Eric Eager from PFF.com, Pro Football Focus, the VP of R&D. Is that Cincy in the background, or is that just a similar looking room in Budapest still?
No, it's Cincinnati. My sister and her husband, who I met last week, we got married. It was a beautiful wedding. It was, me, Petro, I like to bet. And if you ever go to an international wedding, if you want to bet on the sermon time, you have to double that number when they speak two languages, right? So that was something I didn't price in. That was fun. I had a ton of Hungarian beer, and so I'm kind of drying out today. Let's just say that.
I like it. I love that there was gambling and booze. Booze usually goes with the wedding. Most weddings, no problem if you don't, but most weddings they do. But wow, a little gambling going. That's a wedding that I would like to have enjoyed. Listen, we got a lot to get to here tonight. Besides the Eager family goings-ons. When it comes to the Kansas City Chiefs, it's draft time. We're going to take a look at the offensive side of the ball and what to expect from the Chiefs in this draft. Wide receiver, right tackle, tight end, running back, quarterback. Yeah, there's a question about that. How deep is this wide receiver class? Are you going to have to trade up to get what you want in it? Is there a wide receiver that everybody loves that makes the most sense for the Kansas City Chiefs? I think, frankly, the question needs to be asked, are wide receivers being overrated? Do we need to be talking more about the tight end? Travis Kelce's 32. He'll be 33 in season next year. How high do right tackles go? Is running back a need? Clyde Edwards-Helaire is, not right now, not looking like you're going to put the fifth-year tag on him. And Ronald Jones was just signed to a one-year deal. We'll get into that. And I would like to pose the question, is there a scenario where you'd actually take a quarterback in this draft? And we can talk a little bit about Tyrann Mathieu departing if there is time, but we're going to focus on the draft first and foremost. Jeff, let's start with you. What are the priorities for this offense as you see it?
Oh, receiver is the biggest one. I mean, you can throw in right tackle, you can throw in tight end if you want, maybe running back, as you said, but this whole draft on offense is going to be about receiver. It's going to be about finding not so much a replacement for Tyreek Hill, but a receiver they can build around for the future. You look at what they have in that receiver room right now. You're talking about everybody being on one-year deals, right? McCole Hardman's going to be a free agent after this year. Juju Smith-Schuster will be. Marquise Valdes-Scantlin's got a 3-year deal, but he's got to prove that he's going to be somebody who can be a consistent target, who can stay healthy in this offense. So it's time that they start investing in that position in a way where they know they have somebody who they can believe in. They have to be a Jamar Chase level player, Justin Jefferson guy coming in with 1,400 yards in his rookie year, but certainly somebody who can come in here and help this offense, contribute, show promise. I would be shocked if they went through the first round of this draft and did not take a wide receiver because it is time.
All right, calling your shot right there. First round, he says. Eric, what about it? Is it wide receiver when we at least talk about the offensive side of the ball?
I think, and I think right tackle is a far bigger need than I think people are letting on. But I agree with Jeff that wide receiver is the most important position. And I agree with Jeff that it's not, I think back to, when the Vikings traded Randy Moss, right? And they used that 7th pick on Troy Williamson. I was playing for my Minnesota State Dragons at the time, and it was our spring game. I remember that. And I wanted the Vikings to draft Derek Johnson. And instead I went up to one of my assistant coaches during a time when I was like not on the field. And I said, who did Minnesota draft? And he goes, Troy Williamson. And in that draft, the Vikings had the 7th pick and the 18th pick. And I said, no, the first pick. Who do they take with the first pick? And he said, no, it was Troy Williamson. Erasmus James is the other pick, by the way. A privilege. It got A+ from Miles Kiper and everybody. But the problem is, if you try to take a wide receiver to replace Tyreek Hill, you're going to fail. You have to replace Tyreek Hill by components. And, you have the speed component with Valdez-Scantling. You have the after the catch component with Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that goes a long way. I think you have the gadget stuff with McCole Hardman that Tyreek can do. I think, ultimately what you need is somebody who kind of does a few of those things really well. Is that player going to be available to them at 20, in the late 20s? I don't know. I know that the tackle position might be one where, tackles often after the first bunch of picks kind of fall. They're kind of like edge players in that way. I think that they're going to like a tackle more than we think. To me, that's need. I think it's edge, it's wide out, it's corner. Tackle to me is in that same class right after wide receiver.
Yeah, we talk about it. Like, listen, again, we're just doing the offensive side of the ball. So, I mean, next week we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball. So, defensive end will be in the discussion as well. At that point, we know that's something that can be very big in the conversation. But just from the offensive side, I do think I agree with you, Eric, that tackle is not getting enough love, right? Like, because I think if you drafted a great right tackle and even a guy, because I don't think you're going to get one of the top three that look like they're at least would be the quote unquote plug and play left tackles, right? But you get a guy that maybe could grow into it that starts on the right side. And once you got Orlando Brown locked up, you can move him. You ain't moving him from left tackle on the franchise tag. Whenever you get a contract done with him, you get a guy that outplays him. You can be like, yeah, Orlando, let's take some reps over here on the right side. We just want to see how it looks. And then suddenly maybe Orlando Brown goes to a spot that he's even more comfortable. But I think the right guy would have to be there. What would it take in your mind, Jeff, for the first offensive player? Again, defensive guys may go before this, but for the first offensive player to be a tackle and not a wide receiver.
It would take a lot of really good wide receivers being taken ahead of where the Chiefs would be drafting at 29 and 30. I just, and there will be right tackles there. Let's face it, there will be players at that position. The way this draft is going to go, pass rusher is going to be dominant. There's a lot of good left tackles, a lot of good receivers. And so there's going to be a run on those players, between 10, between 20. There's a lot of teams in that 10 to 20 range who are going to be looking at receivers. And it just depends on how the Chiefs evaluate that position. I think we can all pretty much agree that in the last few years, it's been about speed. And so if they saw a guy who had speed, he was attracted to them. And it wasn't always the biggest name guy, such as was the case with McCole Hardman when they took him. He was a pretty raw receiver, but they loved his 40 time. I'm hoping they're more open-minded to receiver in the way that Eric's talking about it, in that you've already got a speed guy, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And so you can afford to take somebody who is more polished. I like Chris Olave a lot. I've watched him in Ohio State for the last 4 years, 3-4 years, and he's been a phenomenal player for them. He's not getting as much love as people like his teammate Garrett Wilson or Drake London or even Jamison Williams. Williams who's coming off that ACL. But he's been a productive player, and a guy like that you can see coming into an offense in the NFL with his pedigree, with his route running, and really being a difference maker. But again, I don't know what their draft board looks like in that regard. So this is a team that has not been afraid to take players who will make you say, what? Yeah. On draft day. So it wouldn't shock me if they went right tackle if the receiver that they liked wasn't there.
Eric, how much does age factor in? Like, I look at the PFF draft board, which, by the way, you guys have great work with those. So does NFL.com. Both of you guys' websites are fantastic, and I'm on them a lot this time of year. I'm on them all year, but especially at draft time. But the top of your board on the PFF breakdown is Drake London. He's under 21 years old. Second on your board is Garrett Wilson, 21.7. Third, Jamison Williams, 21.0. Fourth, Chris Olave, 21.7. I mean, how much is that? Fifth is Sky Moore, 21.5. How much is the age down here? George Pickens at 21.1. How much of that is that whatever they are today, before they're 23, like, Byron Pringle is shocking. I think he's 38 already after just 4 years in the league. He's not. But I think he is like 28 or 29, right? He's a lot older than people realize because he was like 24 when he came out of K-State. How important is that age number? The Chiefs really focus on it when it comes to free agents. Is that something, if you're a Chiefs fan trying to figure it out, that like they ain't taking a guy who's 22, right? Is it a number that should be circled because it just creates a lot more ceiling?
Well, I think it's on a sliding scale. Like when we make our athleticism metrics, we absolutely put age in there because, it obviously is part of the developmental process. I think that I'll explain it with an example. Like Damon Arnett was taken by, the Raiders like in the late teens, 2020. And you looked at his like stuff at Ohio State and you're like, oh, that's good performance. He's not Jeff Okuda, but he's not, he's certainly not getting beat up out there. And then you find out that he's 23 when he's playing all these players. And to me, that clouds the judgment, doesn't it? It clouds the analysis because, and so I think that's it's a really interesting point. Like, the further away from the ball you are, the faster you, generally speaking, can contribute age-wise. And so, but it also depends upon what you're looking for in a draft pick. If you are a team, let's say, if you're looking for a right tackle that can start right away, maybe you take a guy who has, who's older, but he better have dominated in college, right? Because again, if you have a 2-year head start on some players and you're just your numbers are just okay in college, like that's a red flag to me. So age does matter. I kind of want to, circle back to some expectation because I think, one of the big things that analytics can do, but also betting can really like help shape expectations. The Chiefs right now, obviously, are at 28 and 30, 29 and 30, right? So you look at some draft positions on DraftKings. Jamison Williams is 16 and a half. You look at Chris Olave, 17 and a half draft position. And the last one that I wanted to look at, Treylon Burks, 23 and a half. That's a wide receiver that could be, be a different Chief than we're used to. And then lastly, Trevor Penning, who, again, we talked about this on your show, Petro, where he's at 16 and a half. Now over is minus 125. So those are 4 players that I think the Chiefs would love to fall to their spot. And to Jeff's point about what is it going to take for the Chiefs to draft one, it's going to have to be a run on another position. So if it's a run on wideouts and somebody like Trevor Penning gets to their pick, then that's awesome, right? If it's a run on tackles, right, and we see that the prop on DraftKings and others, 7.5 offensive linemen in the first round. Now, some of them are guards and centers like Tyler Linderbaum. But if there's a run on offensive linemen, then they're going to get their pick of wide receiver in all likelihood that they want to have. So I think what's good about the Chiefs is that none of these positions – is there a position in this draft that if they came out of it without position X, you would say that's it, the season's over?
Well, no, but I don't know that that's necessarily the way that you – I mean, like, first of all, if they ever went into a draft like that, it means that something's gone cataclysmically wrong in free agency. Like, I mean, the closest you would be to it now would probably be corner. And I know we've had that question up here about corner. We're going to do defense next week. If you missed the first part of the show, we're doing just the offensive side this week. And, but I mean, DN doesn't look good. I'll be honest with you. DN doesn't look good. What it looks worse than wide receiver. So I think as we look at it, and that's why I think they have a definite need at defensive end. And I think this is the first time they may not think so. If they don't, they're making a mistake. But I think this is the first time they've headed into a draft with Brett Veach at the helm that I would look at it and say, they got to come away with a guy like this. Like, is it over? No, because they have Patrick Mahomes. But like, is this defense, do I say that this defense has no shot at being truly elite? Yeah, I'd say that if they don't come away with a defensive end.
But I don't know. Do you think that there's a position where if they go best player available at one, let's just say offense, if they go best offensive player available at 29, right? I see, like, there's never, unless it's like George Karlaftis falls to 29 and they don't take him and they take like Sky Moore, who's probably more like 35 on the draft board, right? Like, I think that it sounds weird because what I'm trying to, like, it's going to sound like they need so many things that they're in a great position because who cares what they take? but like that's kind of like they have so many sort of like secondary complete the roster needs in a draft that includes all of those positions relatively heavily that I actually don't think, like, I literally think that they should just let the board fall as it does, and they're going to get what they need at 29 and 30, right? Like that. Like I said, like Jeff said, if it's tackles, then take a wideout. If it's wideouts, then take a tackle. If it's edges, whatever. And I know we're talking offense, but I think that that's kind of, they're in a good spot there, and they've given themselves ammunition in all rounds.
Well, and you also have that option of the Soren Petro way of drafting, which is if you don't like what you're looking at, just trade back, just go back. And so I'm no Eric Eager when it comes to math, but I can add. I know that if you're talking about 7 pass rushers potentially going in the first round, 6 or 7 receivers going in the first round, 6 or 7 linemen between tackles and Linderbaum, and then you throw in 3 quarterbacks possibly, right? With maybe 4 if somebody gets desperate, then all of a sudden you're talking about 24, 25 picks being taken. And so, what I don't want to see them do is have to trade up to reach for a guy they should get. I think you sit there, you wait and see what you have. If you don't like it, you trade back, and you're still able to get depth of talent without having to go thinking you're going to get that difference maker because you fall in love with a guy. That's the biggest thing they can make.
Yeah, I'm with you. The scary thing for me is if there is a run elsewhere and the wideout starts sliding, and then at then they come off the board 19 and 21. And is there a panic to get to 22 and get the third guy? Right? Like, I don't know. Like, let's shape the board. What is your wide receiver board, Eric? Let's work from somebody's draft board here. What are you looking at as you say? Because, like, I'll tell you this. You mentioned Treylon Burks, and all during the season, I'm like, wow, I'd love to see Treylon Burks in a Chiefs uniform. He's exactly what you said. He's a guy that does something different. He's big. He's physical. He wins jump balls. And then he goes and he works out, and I'm like, they won't draft him until the 5th round.
Yeah,
they will not touch Treylon Burks. So even though I think he's a guy that plays beyond his 40 time, speed is such an important thing for them. Like, I don't think there's any chance they take Treylon Burks. So, like, I think the Chiefs board, well, we can put together our own draft board here, but I don't think the Chiefs board has Treylon Burks anywhere near the top of it. What do you're Brett Veach, and you're putting together a wide receiver board for Andy Reid and what Andy Reid wants at wide receiver. What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, all the guys that I've kind of had, they're separators, right? And that's the, so the one guy that I've really honed in on and liked is Sky Moore. I know that there are some concerns within the team that he's just a slot receiver. And so, again, I was on this podcast with the Football Analytics Show podcast today, and he was saying, like, well, how do you like kind of do this? How do you do this exercise? And I say, well, you hear things that they say, you hear the concerns that they have about the players you like, right? And then you use that to sort of like craft. So when I hear, well, I think he might just be a slot receiver, I'm thinking that in this draft, they're looking for complete guys, right? They're looking for guys who can line up and start, and then you fold. Juju just plays the slot. MBS just plays X and runs deep patterns. Z runs deep patterns and stuff like that. So when I look at their board, when I look at the current board, Jameson Williams is probably he wouldn't have been this way in 1998, right? When you needed to be like Jake Reed to be this kind of receiver. But nowadays, when Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and even Jamar Chase is not like a 230-pound wide receiver, I think he fits the bill as probably their number 1 receiver. And then from there, I think it goes, Garrett Wilson's probably 2, Olave's 3. To your point, Soren, Drake London is not a guy who has great separation skills. Like, he's a jump ball player. And let's face facts, the Chiefs are not comfortable throwing jump balls to wide receivers. Right. They're they're not even they have in my opinion, the best receiving tight end in the league in league history, and they don't throw him jump balls. Right. So that tells you what they believe. So I think London is a good enough all-around receiver to still be kind of in that class, but among them, he's lower. Same thing with Burks. Burks is 6'2", 225, but he's also 22 already, which to your point on the age thing. And then from that, now you're looking at sort of less complete guys. That's where I sort of out of the box, sort of think it's guys like Christian Watson from NDSU, very good speed. Alec Pierce is somebody who's 6'3", 211 from Cincinnati, who's kind of a pretty good complete receiver. The one guy that I think is like a quintessential Chief, and if they take him, it's a signal that they are still the Chiefs and not some, morphing offense, is Jahan Dotson of Penn State. That's Jahan Dotson to me, great separator, great deep threat, tracks the ball well, not big, but can play all around the line, all around there. And then the last one, and this is a name that's, we all talk about Williams and the reason that Alabama's offense struggled in the playoffs. This is another guy that I know the building, John Mechie from Alabama with the ACL. Like, I think he's, a later round guy, but I think he's going to be, a very useful NFL wide receiver.
If I were to add in a name that maybe isn't prototype, but I think could be Sammy Watkins mold. And maybe they are, because let's be honest, Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdez-Scantling are bigger than they usually go after. And so maybe they are looking for the next Tyreek Hill guy, but maybe they are trying to get bigger at receiver and say, okay, listen, Pat will just put it out there and they'll go make a play. But I think George Pickens is a guy that fits the bill as well, because he's tall at 6'3", but he's not 230. He's only 195. And he ought to have kind of body control that they like. I think the key here, to Jeff's point, is, about saying, hey, I hope they don't go up and trade up, is like identifying what's the tier, right? Like, and that's where, if they've got a tier of 5 guys or 6 guys or 7 guys, then one of those guys is going to be there. And for me, though, I think it's good news. I agree with what Eric said. Drake London's not high on their board based on how they've drafted in the past. Traylon Burks, I don't think is high on their board. If those guys are going, that's good news, because receivers that they like are still there. Do you have a dream guy, Jeff, that you think plays the way the Chiefs usually like their wide receivers to play?
Well, again, I go back to Olave, and for me, it's not. I know the physical traits become super attractive, and they've really defined the Chiefs as far as receivers go. They're guys like Kelce and Hill over the last 5 or 6 years. But to me, it's instincts and it's intelligence that's going to allow these guys in this draft to contribute on a team like this, because you're talking about a quarterback that's been so used to playing off script, who's had to transition into playing more from the pocket, taking what defenses give him. And when you're talking about a guy like that, you need to have, to Eric's point, more complete receivers, guys who know how to read defenses, guys who know how to adjust on the fly, guys who know where to move to when the play goes off script, because that, as Mahomes gets deeper into the second leg of his career here, that's what he's going to have to rely upon. I keep going back to, Devontae Adams and what he was at the start of his career in Green Bay. And it's convenient to forget this now, but he wasn't a guy people were saying, wait till this guy gets to be year 5, year 6, he's going to be the greatest receiver in the league. He was a guy who had his struggles. And then he and Aaron Rodgers got on the same page, and it was beautiful to watch. It was balletic. And so I think that getting a receiver like that, and I'm not going to campaign for Chris Olave, because I think, as Eric said, he's going to be gone by the time they draft. But I think those are the kind of receivers that when you start looking at moving deeper into Mahomes' career, you want to surround him with, not just guys who run fast.
Let me run this by you. Here are the wide receiver schools. I won't even say the name. I'll just say the schools that they have taken since Andy Reid came on board. Georgia, see if you can name them. Name the player. I'll give you the school. See if you can name the player. Georgia.
Conley.
All right. I'm going from their first draft board. Okay, Conley. West Alabama.
That's Tyreek
Hill, right? And that will not be the theme. You're going to quickly see. Florida.
Demarcus Robinson.
Michigan.
J.U. Chason.
They list a Central Arkansas guy, but he actually was a corner. Tremon Smith is listed. He was listed as a wideout.
Pro Bowl returner, right? Or
Pro Bowl returner. That's right.
Who was the receiver?
That's what he was listed at, but they played him at corner right away. Georgia.
That's Hardman.
Cole Hardman, and Clemson.
Yeah, the Cornell.
I forgot that guy's name.
Cornell Powell. Yeah, so did
like 10 months ago, huh?
I'm trying to remember what's the wide receiver coach's name. So did he.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly.
Right.
But the point is, Like, do we really think that they're going to take anyone? Like, can't we just take off the board right away guys like Sky Moore from Western Michigan? We can take off the board Jalen Tolbert from South Alabama, Christian Watson from North Dakota
Jalen
State.
Tolbert's a nice player. He's also 23. Like, I think that's another issue with him.
Yeah, okay. But I like Christian Watson, but again, also 23 age-wise, but I think he looks the part. I mean, do all small school guys have to be taken off the board, Eric, because they seem to only evaluate the big schools?
Yeah, that's actually, I think that's a really insightful observation, because I even think of, the guys they've missed maybe. I mean, even if you just look at, last season's draft, it's Missouri, Oklahoma, Florida State, Duke, Clemson, Tennessee. I guess, Duke is really the only kind of crap, and that's even like an ACC school.
Right.
You're looking at the season before, it was LSU, SEC, Mississippi State, SEC. L'Jarius Sneed, actually one of their better players from Louisiana Tech, right? That's like a tricky one. But you're not seeing a ton of FCS or even like group of five guys. And when you do see them, they're often not very good. Darwin Thompson, Utah State cut. Kylan Saunders has been a huge disappointment, Western Illinois. The majority of the guys they take high. Even Breland Speaks, who, was a horrible bust, was from Ole Miss.
Yeah.
So like it's a very interesting observation there. Tano Passing, taken from the football juggernaut of Villanova, though, which is maybe a little bit of a difference for them.
Well, when you mention, some of those guys that haven't developed, I'll give credit to someone who goes, yeah, we're not good at bringing those guys up to another level. Like, that's not what we're good at, so stop taking them. Like the Royals.
That was the thing with Belichick, right? Where you looked at Chad Jackson, you looked at, I'm trying to think of all the wide receivers they drafted and were terrible. And eventually they're like, all right, we're just going to trade for Brandon Cooks. Now they went back and took N'Keal Harry, which just reinforced how bad they are at drafting wide receivers. But like there is something to having the self-awareness to balk at situations. Like I would imagine, they just have a weakness. I wouldn't even say like a weakness in their scouting department, but maybe there's, I'll say this, it's not easy to measure, it's not easy to look and say, let's imagine that guy's in the SEC and let's see how he runs a route like that. It's just not, that's not, the trained eye is difficult at even discerning that, I would say.
Oh yeah, but there is a little bit, and I hear what Soren's saying. You could apply that same, listing you just did to all the players they've drafted, pretty much the Thornhills, the Clyde Edwards-Halairs, the Willie Gazer from Southern schools as well. I do think it's a bit of a weakness if you're always going to one region of the country to find your talent. I do think that if you're making the assumption that one area of the country is stronger just because of whatever, how they rank, how you see them in bowl games, whatever, and there is a lot of talent in that region of the country. But if you're not going to other areas to find players, I do have to question that a little bit. And I think as a GM, I think you'd want to question that.
Agreed. But is it kind of a drafting high floor mentality, Eric? Is that what you could say, that if a guy can play in the SEC, we know he can at least line up in the NFL as opposed to swinging and missing? I agree. I think that some of the best diamonds in the rough come from those smaller schools. Antonio Brown, you want to talk about wide receivers, was a guy, I know it's been a disaster, a hot mess here of late, but early on with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was the best wide receiver in football. And
what about Cooper Kupp?
Cooper Kupp, exactly. And Cooper Kupp's a great example of a guy who didn't click all the athletic boxes, right? It's clear the wide receiver position, you want guys that can flat out run, but there's more to it than just that. But is it a high floor mentality, Eric, that they're employing when it comes to the draft?
Well, I think it's more of just a low uncertainty thing, which I think is maybe why they haven't really hit on picks, right? Because, essentially what you're trying to do is limit the floor, but what you get with that is limiting the ceiling too. And so, a guy like Nick Bolton, for example, like I think we all agree that he's a really good chief, but he might not necessarily have Derek Johnson upside, right? Because, if he did, he'd be taken in round one. Right? Like if he had that kind of upside. Like everything comes at a price, right? If you want to buy a high floor, the cost is often a low ceiling, and I think that's kind of the issue there. Away from the football, to me, is I think where like the Rams are very innovative, right? They use the GPS tracking data on Cooper Kupp and found out that he played much more like a 4-5 guy than how he tested as like a 4-6-2 guy. So I don't know if the Chiefs are on that cutting edge yet, right? So to be safe, you're going to say, well, like I think of Cameron Dantzler when he came out, and it's like, well, the guy ran a 4.6, and it's like, sure, but you turn on his film and everywhere, like he's not getting beat up by SEC wide receivers, so he's probably okay. Now, if a guy from Central Michigan ran a 4.6 and he was locking players down in the MAC, then I think the question of whether or not that tape is legitimate is far more pertinent to the discussion, right? Like that's I think where. But again, all those things come at a cost. Like none of the things like that. That's I think the big thing that all of us like believe now with PFF, but also just draft Twitter and everybody's interest in the sport growing. There's really not a huge edge in picking players, right? There's a huge edge in doing the draft better than other teams, but there really isn't. Like no team is better at picking the 35th best player than anybody else. And again, I think it's because all the information is fairly well known.
Does the Chiefs offense, Jeff, help or hurt receivers? I mean, we they hit obviously the 5th round pick in Tyreek Hill, and credit Tyreek first and their coaching staff second for taking a guy who didn't play much in college and played mostly running back in college and turning him into a wide receiver. That's just it's such an amazing development, right? Yeah. All around on that one that it really stands out. We mentioned big school guys, some of them in the 2nd round. McCole Hardman's been fine, but not great. But Chris Conley in the 3rd round athletically had all the tools and was coming from Georgia. Like, is there a flaw in the offense that makes it harder for wide receivers to develop?
Well, I think I wouldn't call it a flaw. It's just an expectation. Andy Reid likes to have his receivers know all the positions because you obviously have more variety, more flexibility in what you call, harder for defenses to lock in on what you're trying to do. You can really be creative with your personnel groups, and I understand all that. But the reason why Jamar Chase can go play at a high level in Cincinnati is because they're keeping it really simple. It's like we're throwing you the football, Chief, and we're not going to make it super complicated. We can add things as time goes by, but yeah. So there is certainly a tougher learning curve when it comes to being a young receiver in the Chiefs offense. And part of that too had to do with just the ball was going to Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce so much over the last few years that even if you were a younger receiver, like a DeMarcus Robinson or a Byron Pringle, it was harder to find, or McCole Hardman, it was harder to find your niche. I mean, the way the college game is being played today, and Eric probably can attest to this too, it's so different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago because receivers have a much easier time getting off the line of scrimmage, running routes. They're running against coverages that are not that advanced. Oftentimes, if you're a 2nd or 3rd receiver, you're going against a corner that's not as skilled as you are. It's just, it's a great marketplace to be a receiver and put up huge numbers. But you get to this level and you have to learn how to deal with better competition, and you have to learn offenses that are more intricate. It's just a tougher grind. And so I keep going back to it. That's why guys like Chris Olave appeal to me. And I'm sure there are other players who are like him who aren't as lauded right now in this draft who they can select. But intelligence and instincts are going to mean a lot more in an offense like this just because of what Andy Reid asked of the receivers.
All right. Will the Chiefs have to trade up to get an impact wide receiver? I want to play a game. Okay. And let's see what it tells us. I've looked at it and I've kind of cherry picked it a little bit to see where it's going to go. And depending upon how you guys answer is going to do a lot to tell, but I might pick a different one to show you. 13 to 20, right? Those are the drafts that have happened since Andy Reid got here. Pick a year and let's review where the best receivers, and I'd rank them by receiving yards in each one of those drafts, what draft pick they came from. So randomly give me any year. Obviously 21, we've got the smallest sample size. If you go there, the further back, the more years the guys have had to play. But each of you give me a year. Jeff, give me a year and we'll look.
15.
15. Eric, give me another one.
13.
13. All right. I got 13 up right here. Right. 2013, number one wide receiver, yardage wise, DeAndre Hopkins, 10,500 yards. He went number 27, went in the first round. He was not the first wide receiver taken.
Tavon Austin.
Tavon Austin went number 8.
Good memory.
And he is way down the list. And then also in that same neighborhood, Cordarrelle Patterson went 29. Tyler and a tight end, Tyler Eifert, went 21. Those were the pass catchers in that. After him, Travis Kelce second with 9,000 yards. Keenan Allen in the third, 8,500. Robert Woods in the second at 41 is at 7,000 yards. Zach Ertz comes up next. Kenny Stills in the fifth is the sixth best receiver in the fifth, right? So that's just that year, right? Jordan Reed is next, 3,600 yards. We're coming off. He was a third round pick. All right. But if you go up for like but if you go up 7,000 plus, you've got DeAndre Hopkins at 27, Keenan Allen at 76, Robert Woods at 41. And Jeff, you said 2015?
Yeah.
Okay. 2015. Number one, Stephon Diggs was 7,400. He went
fifth round pick.
146. 2 was 7,000 yards. Amari Cooper, he went fourth. 3, Tyler Lockett was just over 6,000. Third round pick, number 69. Fourth, Devontae Parker at 4,700 went 14th. Next is pick 20, Nelson Aguilar with 3,800. Darren Waller comes in the sixth after that. Duke Johnson, a running back. Chris Conley at 76.
Is Brashad Perriman in that draft? That's the Brashad Perriman. Is he in that draft too?
Yes, he is 4, 6, 8.
And Corey Coleman, was he in there?
Yeah. So that the end of that draft was Perriman at 26 and Philip Dorsett at 29.
Yeah. Bad first round.
Yeah, so DeAndre Hopkins is there at 27, and people are going to get excited. But the bottom of the first round seems like scary territory for a wide receiver.
Well, but even Petro, if you look at the 2014 draft, right? Like this is the one that everybody's going to point to. You have Sammy Watkins at 4. You have Mike Evans at 7. You have Odell at 12. You have Brandon Cooks at 20 and Kelvin Benjamin at 28. All guys that have had 1,000-yard season. You still go. Marquise Lee was close to 1,000 yards. He was picked like 39. Jordan Matthews had a couple 900-yard years. I remember he was picked 42. Paul Richardson was decent when healthy, and the best guy of the bunch is Devontae Adams, picked at 53, and Allen Robinson was picked at 61. Jarvis Landry at 63. The point that you're making, I think, is a good one, which is if the Chiefs believe that if the Chiefs believe strongly enough that they found, quote, the guy, I think we have to worry a little bit about their reasoning.
Well, that brings me to the question, are wide receivers being overrated in the draft? We've talked about this in free agency and in the trade market, that we think the value that was returned for Tyreek Hill is tremendous. And I think at the end of the day, the Dolphins are probably, mostly because Tua is probably not a Super Bowl quarterback, they're not going to win a championship, and they're going to end up having this huge contract that people are going to say, wow, that deal didn't end up so good, particularly if the Chiefs hit on a couple of those picks. And if one of them's a wideout and he equals the numbers of Tyreek Hill, the Dolphins are going to become a laughingstock. But I mean, I do think that, as we've said, in trades and in free agency, they're somewhat being overrated. Jeff, are they being overrated here in the draft?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they're often overrated. And that's the only reason they should be highly rated is when you have a young quarterback who's trying to prove himself on a young rookie deal, like a Joe Burrow, who can use a Jamar Chase to advance his cause. I mean, when you have a Patrick Mahomes, you don't need to hope and pray to always have these phenomenal weapons around him. Now, granted, anybody would take Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or people like that, but you should be looking at it like, how can we get the next Devontae Adams? How can we find the next Cooper Kupp? Because you've got a little more margin for error to work with. And, I love great wide receiver play as much as anybody else does, but I think about the best quarterbacks in the NFL over the last 10 years. And most of those guys have been playing with guys who were second round picks or lower. You look at what Russell Wilson had in Seattle with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. You look at what Aaron Rodgers had with Devontae Adams. Look at Drew Brees before he left, with Michael Thomas. You look at what Tom Brady was playing with in New England for most of his time there. And there's a reason for that, because you have a great quarterback. You don't need to go out and hit home runs at receiver. You need to find guys who can fit into your system, who you can trust to play good football at a high level.
Well, you look at the teams that have won the Super Bowl, right? Like, New England, clearly we talked about them, failing at drafting wide receivers. But even think about the 2011 year when they lost to the Giants. Who was the big player on that team? That was Victor Cruz, basically a no one, who Eli Manning, and like we all give Eli Manning crap because he looked really bad at the end of his career. But Eli Manning was white hot for 2010, 2011, even a little bit of 2012. And again, to Jeff's point, that's a great quarterback taking a wide receiver with some gifts. If Victor Cruz is on the Detroit Lions, like, stinks, right? Like that's like the whole point. You look at the Super Bowl winners, I joke about this, but when Seattle played New England in their second Super Bowl, none of the receivers that were active for that game were drafted. Not just drafted by the Seahawks, but drafted in the NFL draft. Like, that's a big deal, right? Like, Doug Baldwin is a guy who was very functional. Atlanta had Julio, of course, but they also had, Mohamed Sanu and Taylor Gabriel, guys who, again, have not had success elsewhere. The Eagles, they got something out of Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey, but in that game it was a cast off in Torrey Smith that was a deep threat in that game. Rams, as you said, Cup, the 49ers, Deebo Samuel was a second round pick. That was their Kendrick Bourne was one of their wide receivers. So there's the league is littered with to your point, like, guys who, and this is why, again, the Chiefs are zigging when everybody else is zagging. When you don't have a Patrick Mahomes, you have to shove more chips into the middle at wide receiver. When you do, you can mix and match.
Yeah, we're going to see what Devontae Adams is without him, without Aaron Rodgers. I think that's going to be big. I like this comment from Gary. Mahomes can do a lot more to make the guys on offense better than he can the guys on defense, DB, edge, D-line with the higher picks. And I think that's a valid point that, like, the quarterback is going to cover up some of it. And so, I do agree with that. But I also don't think just piecing together cast-off free agents at right tackle is smart. And I think right tackle has to be a pretty good priority. And I think, I think my answer to the question is, do you have to trade up to get a wide receiver? The answer is no. And I think that the exercise we just did says that no, you don't. And you're not guaranteeing yourself a whole lot by doing it. So if there's a right tackle that's there at 29, is there a guy that at the end of the day, would that be the wiser move? And then throw a couple of picks at wide receiver in the second and third round. Give yourself more shots, but take the more premium player at 29 or 30 with an offensive tackle, Jeff, that seemingly, gives you a better pedigree at that tackle spot, which is going to be important. 15 can make people look better, but he can't from his ass. And I know, and Eric and the analytics guys have proven the quarterback does a lot to keep away from the sack number, but oftentimes he's throwing it under duress and still taking hits. Is right tackle a lot, maybe not the likeliest choice, but maybe more likely than people may realize going into this, up there in the first round?
Yeah. I mean, there's a guy, I think Eric mentioned him, from Central Michigan, Bernard Raymond. Am I saying his name correctly? Mm-hmm. Yeah, who could be an appealing option at that point. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense because, again, we look at the Chiefs of the last 4 or 5 years, we underestimate how much Mitchell Schwartz meant to Eric Fisher. And I think when you have a left tackle situation where whatever they end up paying Orlando Brown, I think we can all assume that he's not going to end up being the second coming of Orlando Pace. And so I think you're always going to be a little bit unsure of how great a player you're going to have there. And if you have something at right tackle who's consistent, you don't have to worry about. It allows you to do a lot more things with your offensive line. Now they're strong in the interior, but again, when Lucas Niang went down, when they lost Schwartz and Fisher in the Super Bowl, it became a lot harder to protect the quarterback. And the way this league is going, you're going to see 2 very good edge rushers every week now. That's what everybody's trying to do. Everybody's loading up in the offseason and free agency to do that. This draft is going to have 7 to 10 guys who are going to come in just to do that, to get after the quarterback. You're going to see a lot less Blitzing, that's been a trend in this league for the last couple of years that people don't talk that much about. A lot more teams playing too high safety, a lot more teams playing coverage. And so you're going to see teams loading up on defensive ends to come after your quarterback. And you just can't have an okay left tackle. You need to have two guys on the edge who can hold up. And as much as Andrew Wiley's been a good piece of this team, I don't think he's the long-term answer there.
How about Zach Tom of Wake Forest? If I were to dig down, I've had that name thrown at me twice in the last 2 days, once by Anthony Tresh of Pro Football Focus, who was on my show, The Program, on A10. What about him from Wake Forest? He's a little bit undersized, but super athletic, stays in front of guys. That's not your typical Andy Reid draft. He tends to like the biggest butt he can find. I remember the old joke, find the 5 biggest butts you can get in front of you. That was kind of in the old running back days, right? Athleticism is a lot more a part of it. But Eric Fisher wasn't the biggest butt. He was the most athletic guy. There was potential for a great size. He was 6'8", but just right around 300 pounds. Whether it's him or somebody else, is there a guy that could be there in the second or third round that would fit the bill for an Andy Reid type offensive tackle, Eric?
Well, I think the one that's interesting is sort of the opposite, is the Daniel Faldell,
right?
The 22-year-old, the 6'8", 384, and I think the guy probably had to take some athletic greens to get down to 384. He's sort of the opposite. Max Mitchell of Louisiana, that's a good program, but again, we were talking about sort of group of 5 schools. Those are, those are all guys that are available. I always end up taking Kellen Diesch in these mocks, but he's almost 25 years old, 6'7", 301, graded well at Arizona State last year. There are, the ones you kind of get worried about are, Abraham Lucas from Washington State. I always get Mitchell's brother, Jeff, will DM me and say, stop taking air raid offensive linemen in your drafts. So that's one that I get a little worried about. I think Raymond's the one, if he falls as a result of Trevor Penning, the UNI player, that's one that I like. I like him a lot. He's also a math major, so I'm like a big fan anyway. He's somebody I always like, but it just depends upon where he goes. But he could be somebody that's available at their first or second pick, obviously. That we have ranked as our 13th guy, but could actually fall, out of the first round.
And a former tight end too, right? Wasn't he starter's
former tight end? Which I think like it depends. Like, is it Jason Peters, the former tight end, right? That you have that athleticism there. I think that this is not this is a point that is extremely important and can't be stressed enough. I think Orlando Brown is far closer to Eric Fisher than he is Orlando Pace, to Jeff's point, which is not a disparaging comment. Eric Fisher was a good offensive tackle. If that's the case and they're going to buy into him long term, they need a right tackle who can play, like who can really, really play. And it's not going to be cost effective to do that through free agency. So it's going to have to come from this draft, I think.
And I think when you're not paying a lot of money at center and right guard, and you have the security of 3 more years of not paying a lot of money at center and guard because you hit in the second and 6th round, I think it gets a lot more acceptable to pop 29 or 30 on an offensive tackle if they're there. By the way, on a number of, and there's a mock draft simulator on PFF.com, and Daniel Falele, I take him in there, and the simulator always grades me like I'm a moron. Okay, so if you go down that, like I love taking all 12 picks and playing it in shuffles and does it different ways, and I usually find a way to draft him, and it's like, yeah, you're an idiot. Never consider drafting again. So just for the record, that's how that is viewed by the PFF website. Listen, what do we think about the tight end position? Travis Kelce is 32. He'll be 33 in October of next year. Jeff, is that a bigger deal than people may realize? And of those 8 picks, if they would have all 8, do they need to be looking at investing at a bigger upside? Noah Gray, they took in the 5th round last year. Didn't see much out of him this year. Maybe he'll develop in the second year. But again, he's not coming from, southeastern Louisiana. He came from an ACC school. So I don't know how long it should take on that level. But is that a position that, for flexibility, to be able to play 2 tight ends, to show a different look? Because clearly the Chiefs are kind of butting into a ceiling how they're playing offense. And maybe it's just to line up and pound the rock with the football to get them to come out of some of those, all the nickels and things that they're doing. Is tight end a bigger priority than people might realize?
Yes, and you're right. We keep waiting for that dual tight end offense or whatever. Last year when they had 4 tight ends on the roster, it still hasn't happened.
Which, by the way, Jeff loved.
Yeah.
Some of our first podcasts, we were talking about the roster building. He was thrilled to see all those tight ends on there.
That's right. All the contributions they made.
That's what I was just saying.
All those contributions.
Really made a huge impact. Yeah.
I know Jordy Fortune was going to take off until he got hurt, but
he was ready to break out the next game after he got hurt. But
to take over. So I think it is, because the kind of tight end Travis Kelce is, like, being an athletic, a guy who's able to rely on speed and athleticism to make plays. Like, those guys go downhill a lot faster than the guys who are more your traditional. Like, guys like Gronk can play a long time just because they're just like robots out there. They're used to getting pounded. They like it. They're going to be physical. That's not Travis Kelce's game. And so as he gets older, just as with Tyreek Hill, there's going to come a day when he's not going to be part of this offense. And so, yeah, you do have to start thinking about who is going to be that guy who's going to offer Patrick Mahomes that kind of security blanket. And the cold truth is this, that it's harder to find those guys than it was 5-10 years ago in the draft, just because of the way college football is being played. Again, it's so wide open at that level now that the receivers who are like Kelce, Noah Gray's 6'4", 240.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So basically you're getting a big receiver. You're getting a big wide receiver. And if you want somebody to do other things in your offense, like block, it gets hard to do it. And so if there's somebody that you like in this draft who fits that bill in the mid rounds, I totally would be for taking it, because you just don't know when Travis Kelce is going to hit that wall. And he's in an age where that wall could come faster than people realize.
Is it more important than people think, Eric? And is there a fit for anybody in this class?
I think that the hard part, and it's why, where are the tight ends going? If the guy's not a unicorn like Kyle Pitts, who really isn't a tight end, the guy's coming from Iowa, right? Like Hawkinson or Kittle, because like those offenses actually sort of reflect what a tight end, a real tight end, is actually doing in the NFL. Now, this draft, it's a huge underdog for a tight end to go in round 1. Our highest guy is at 64. I like Trey McBride the best. He's from Colorado State. He actually does fit the bill. Greg Dulcich from UCLA and Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina are more kind of the athletes at the position. They're not like the down blocking a defensive end, in the 4-3 type of player. So those are guys that I kind of like. But yeah, I mean, the true, and you look at the league right now, there are 5 good tight ends in the whole league. The reason that is the case is exactly what Jeff's saying.
How about running back, right? Clyde Edwards-Helaire has not taken the baton and gone. And I'm not talking about in round 1. We all agree years ago that the recipe was written that you're not drafting running backs in round 1. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I mean, they're going to have to make a decision on the 5th year. After this year, correct? After this year is when they got to make their choice on whether or not they're going to give him the 5th year. Right now, the answer would be no. I don't see him getting the 5th year. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, something Jeff has cautioned all along. But is there a running back? Is there a need for a running back? You've got, Ronald Jones signed on a 1-year deal, but you lost a couple of pretty good backs. Or is it no, just anybody off the street at the end of the free agent run? Jeff, Andy Reid and his offense are going to make productive, and so don't waste a draft pick on them.
I think when you got 12 picks, and I don't see them using all 12 picks, you have the luxury of taking a flyer on a guy. I don't see a problem with it. Again, for the reason you just mentioned, when you look at what's in that room right now, pretty good chance both those guys aren't going to be around in a couple of years. So again, the way the Chiefs offense is built, and something Eric has really trumpeted over the last few months, is developing players. The only way you develop players is by getting young guys in and letting them play. So I'm definitely all for the idea of finding anybody who can help this offense, especially in the backfield, just because I think they will play a little different brand of football. They will be asking more of their backs. I don't think Edwards-Helaire is ever going to be a difference maker, as you know, live up to the hype that came with his draft status. But yeah, I don't have a problem with a mid-round pick, taking a guy who you think has been productive, who can catch the football, who can do some things for you as far as pass blocking, and if he's well equipped to work in this offense, take him.
Yeah, and in this draft, Eric, they're old. The running backs, looking through the PFF list,
Yeah.
there's a lot of 23 pluses in this list.
Well, the one that could go in the first round, I think he's plus 140 to go in the first round. The running back position is an underdog to even have a first round pick, and that's Breece Hall, who's not 21 yet. Of Iowa State, he's the one that tested the best. Here's a few guys that I like, and I also, just talking to people, could be on the Chiefs' radar. Dameon Pierce from Florida is, I think, a very good running back and has gotten better over time. The one that I think if he goes, there's going to be a team that really likes him and takes him higher than maybe they should. But Dalvin Cook's brother, James Cook, is very good. Mm-hmm. And, I think when I watch him play, I kind of see Kareem Hunt, maybe a smaller version of Kareem Hunt.
That caught Soren's eye.
I mean, I loved Kareem Hunt coming out of Toledo for sure. I mean, I think he's
Kareem Hunt's a little
20 pounds smaller.
Kareem Hunt's different because of the tackle breaking. But when I see James Cook, I see a guy that can run the deep ball from the running back position the way that Kareem Hunt did on opening night in 17, where you look and this guy's running the arrow route, and instead of crossing the linebacker's face, he's going over the top of him, right? And as much as and Clyde, look, Clyde, if Clyde's taken in round 2, we're not nearly as hard on him, right? So Clyde doesn't suck, but Clyde's not beating a safety deep to the post, right? And when you look at James Cook, he has that the same. Again, as a runner, I don't think the Chiefs are looking for a runner in this draft. They're looking for a running back that can do things that supplement the offense, which is a pass-catching running back. And as good as McKinnon was out of the backfield at the late ends, he's still not that explosive either. They're looking for, a guy to, play, be explosive on late downs. And I think Cook is kind of that guy. And he doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires, right? He's only carried the ball 150 times, recently. So, that's somebody who I kind of like. The guy that's a late round guy that I hope they take, and this is because I'm a big fan of James White, and I think Isaiah Spiller is exactly who James White is.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's another one. If they go with him in round 5, I'd be a huge fan.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You said, and he's one of the younger backs out of A&M as well, under 21 years old. You said Kareem Hunt, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not going to beat a safety to the post the way Kareem Hunt did. What are the 40 times of each of those players?
I would assume Kareem Hunt's 40 time wasn't that good.
Kareem Hunt ran a 4.62 and Clyde Edwards-Helaire ran a 4.61.
Yeah, and Clyde in theory was a good catcher of the football in the back. We just not had.
I agree, and that's what I'm getting at a little bit is so why isn't it better? I mean, Jerry Rice ran a 4.65, but you watch him play, he was fast in pads. He was 4.65.
Chris Carter ran a 4.7. Anquan Bolden ran a 4.75 or whatever the hell.
Ran a 4.6 something, and he's leading the league. I mean, there's more to it than just the 40 time. So they can run the same 40 time, and Kareem Hunt can play a lot faster. I mean, that's one of the answers to the question. But also, Andy Reid may have just gotten away from what worked, right? The mad scientist. I've had Tim Grunhard tell me a lot of times that one of the most maddening things is for offensive coordinators that just can't help. We came up with 90 plays, and even though we got one that's just kicking their ass, we're going to run these other 30 because I didn't spend all these hours at 3 a.m. drawing up these plays, so we're getting to them. And I could see Andy Reid getting lost, in the trees, or lost in the forest because he can't see the trees. I can totally see that happening. So maybe it's there and they just haven't run it. I don't know. Last thing, let's get to this. What would it take to take a quarterback, Jeff? What would have to happen for the Chiefs to take a quarterback in this draft?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea just because you can develop somebody and trade them. And that's been some teams, the Green Bay Packers going back years ago, made quite a living doing that with the Mark Brunells and the Aaron Brookses of the world.
That list is pretty extensive and impressive.
Yeah, it is. Kurt Warner's on that list as well.
Hasselbeck.
And so I think that there is. It's not a bad. It's not, given the amount of picks they have again. It's not a bad move in theory to take a guy, stash him for a while, and see if you can capitalize on his skills 2-3 years down the road. Now I know, cue your Tyler Bray joke right now, but it's if you do it right, there's always a need for quarterbacks out there. And you look at the Ravens right now with the kid that was playing behind Lamar Jackson, ended up playing Tyler Huntley, and he definitely created a market for himself based on what he did this past year. So if you can find a kid and you can develop him and he can play, you can use that as a way to make a good trade down the road.
Eric, what do you think it'd take for a quarterback?
I don't think in any circumstance would they take a quarterback who isn't like a Taysom Hill type, or like what, like something like that. I mean, Pat's the quarterback. They've already paid Chad Henne. Like, I don't think that there's really an edge. The other part is the league, and I love Jeff throwing it back to the Packers because it was such an extensive and I mean, Brett Favre even was on that list, right? Like the Mikowski was the quarterback when they traded for Favre, and Rodgers is on that list too, like in a weird way. But it's different now, right? If you look, 20 years ago, Jake Delhomme, Rich Gannon, Brad Johnson, Tony Romo, quarterbacks that were low pedigree guys were hanging around the league, because the league incentivized having a third quarterback by having the designation on game day, and B, because if you failed at the quarterback position and needed to draft one, it cost $50 million guaranteed to draft Sam Bradford, right? So there was an incentive to develop a guy like Romo, to develop a guy like Brad Johnson, to develop a guy like Kurt Warner, Matt Hasselbeck, and so on and so forth. The problem with the NFL now is that there's no incentive to go to the Chiefs and trade a third-round pick for a schmuck quarterback we've never seen, because the opportunity cost is just going and picking a guy in the first round who's cheap as hell anyway, right? So I think I don't think there's and we're seeing that with Jordan Love, right? The problem with Jordan Love, when Aaron Rodgers signed his rookie deal with Green Bay, it was 6 years, $7 million, or 5 years, $7 million, right? And so when Rodgers signed his first deal after that, everybody's like, oh, it was a really cheap deal. They should do that with Jordan Love. And it's like, well, no, Jordan Love's fifth-year option is going to be a lot of money. And so he's not going to be desperate to sign a deal because his yearly salary isn't less than $2 million like Rodgers was at the time, right? Yeah. So the economics, and I hate it. I hate that it's this way because I love Jake Delhomme. I thought Jake Delhomme was a gamer. I thought he was a great story. But, like, there isn't room in the NFL for that anymore. The incentives are just not there. And quarterbacks are also not hurt as much anymore either. So, like, you don't get to see a guy come off the bench and have like a great performance and be that kind of, next guy up. So that's I would say under no circumstance do I draft a quarterback who is purely a quarterback for Kansas City.
By the way, a little housekeeping, Irish Mac, what did the Chiefs give up? They got Matt Castle and Mike Vrabel for a second-round pick, was what that deal ended up being. I'm not sure why you're worried about what they gave up for Matt Castle, but I thought I'd answer it. This is interesting. A non-Chief fan here to listen to me, Mr. Eager, once again. There it is, the popularity of one Eric Eager.
Castle, by the way, was Castle. The Castle trade, by the way, was pre CBA, right?
What do you mean pre CBA?
Castle, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Castle was a developmental quarterback who did not start in college, who the Patriots drafted to sit behind Doug Flutie and.
Yeah, but he's talking about what the Chiefs gave up to get him.
Right, but the Chiefs trading for Matt Castle was a realistic alternative to, like, what was their pick? Was it into 2009? It was pick 3 was where they got Tyson Jackson, right?
No, it was 09 was Tyson Jackson pick 3.
So, like, let's assume a quarterback's available at 3. Like, his initial contract is probably more than Matt Castle's was.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Well,
like
they
that.
turned around and gave Castle $7 million a year.
But the third pick in the draft was making $7 million. Like the reason that trading.
I hear where you're going, but Castle sucked, and that trade was.
Of course, Castle sucked, but you make the low stakes gamble. It was look, if you had the third pick in the draft right now, right? Would you trade? And you had the third pick in the draft right now, and let's say it was a quarterback draft like 2018, right? So you have Mayfield, Darnold, Josh Allen, so on and so forth. Would you forego the chance to draft one of those guys and pay them $8 million a year for the privilege of trading, let's say, 2 seconds for a veteran like, let's say Mitch Trubisky? Let's just assume that like he's kind of a similar Castle figure there, and pay him $15 million a year. That's basically that's basically what you're advocating that could happen in a league now, where again, the difference between what you're taking even at the highest part of the draft and like a shitty quarterback like Trubisky, like those, the difference there makes drafting a guy so much better of a move. Back then, when you had to pay Sam Bradford $50 million, right? Eric Berry's first contract was bigger than his second because of the CBA. Like, that's why a developmental quarterback is not a good investment.
Well, I mean, I have to go back and look at the 2009 draft and who the quarterbacks were in it, and I might be.
Was it Bradford?
No,
Stafford.
Stafford was the first pick. Yeah.
That was Stafford, Sanchez, and Josh
Sanchez.
Freeman.
So let's look at Mark Sanchez's first deal.
Sanchez went Stafford 1, Sanchez 5.
Sanchez was a trade up to 5. So Sanchez's first contract was, I'm trying to look at Sanchez's 5 years, $50 million. So he made $10 million APY, $28 million guaranteed. So his rookie deal was more than Castle's deal. And Castle had a 10-5 season, and you know what I'm saying? Like those were the opportunity costs at the time.
I can't believe I'm talking about Matt Castle here.
It's not my fault. I didn't bring it up.
I just was answering the question as a point of reference, and you decided to jump in and somehow defend the move.
I'm not defending. I'm saying in the end, it was a different NFL. No one would do that now. 0 people would do that now. No one would do that now.
Yeah.
I respect. Like, I'm sorry for the Castle. My bad. I'm sorry for putting it out there. If you're joining us via the podcast, you can always be part of the conversation in the chat room. If you catch us on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook when we stream live Tuesdays at 9, every other Tuesday now during the offseason, although we'll pick up every week here for a couple of weeks in and around the draft coming up here very shortly. But I will just say this on the quarterback. I wish Malik Willis weren't as good as he is, right? Because I would love a Malik Willis in the 7th round, a guy that the Chiefs could actually keep active, be the short yardage guy, have a package, a guy who can run but has the ability to throw. Right? Like, hey, we might be able to develop this guy as a passer. We know he can flat out run, and have him be your 2-pointers, maybe sometimes have a package for him, but have a short yardage package for him to be able to run. I would love for that guy to be out there, but Malik Willis is way too good and going to go way too high. That's not it. But a Malik Willis playing for Southeast Louisiana, who is rated as a 6th round, a college free agent. I would love for one of those 7th round picks to be using them. I've been lobbying for Blake Bell. Right, and we know that blew up on.
That's right. Another tight end.
Yeah. But I'm loving
Blake Bell is part of the journey, guys. Part of the journey to 13 seconds.
Always part of the journey. Hey, listen, if you would, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, wherever you are, if you'd hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, it would be great for us. We really would appreciate it. We love having everyone be a part of the conversation. Like I said, you can catch us on the podcast. And of course, if you are catching us on the podcast, you can catch us on the stream live. That is every Tuesday right now, every other Tuesday, but we're going to ramp that up here around the draft in a week or so. So stay tuned for that. So for Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network and NFL.com, Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, PFF.com. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. Thank you for joining us on Red, Gold, and Bold.